Here we go.
Hey, I know the desert like the back of my hand, okay? Best case scenario, you just gotta keep me honest.
And the worst?
We improvise.
Okay. Following your lead.
I just got done sound designing this crazy scene, and pretty recently in a panel I was on, I mentioned using 3D software to visualize a scene before going into sound design. Now this scene used that method, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to kind of talk about what I mean a little bit more. What I don't mean is doing a complete, accurate 3D model of your scene. I think that's what a lot of people think that means, and that there's a technology barrier to using this kind of method, but that's really not it. I'm not talking about technology or any kind of 3D spatial sound design software or plugins. What I'm talking about is pre-visualizing the scene so we know how to sound design it. This is just another tool in the toolbox. 3D applications happens to be where I'm comfortable working, but for you it might be as easy as a napkin drawing. You can do the same thing, and I'll kind of show you what I mean by that. Now the scene in question has 6 or so characters in a confined space, moving over rough terrain, and there's some gunfighting and exciting music in the whole 9 yards. And I used this method because I wanted to create a very clear picture of the space they were in. And to be able to fully visualize that, I kind of needed some help. Now I just made a very rudimentary scene. You can see it's not very, it's not very good at all. And for this kind of thing, it doesn't have to be. What I'm talking about is using rudimentary shapes to block out scenes and make decisions about them before getting into sound design, because this kind of can bring up questions about, materials or other things that might impact, reflections and things like that when you go in to set up your reverbs. So the environment for this scene is a vehicle called a dune sail. And so I broke that down into the cockpit and like the people carrier area and the cargo area, which is not really defined. Maybe it's a little bigger than this. It doesn't really matter. We never even hear it. This is just to kind of get an idea of how comfortably 6 people can move around a very confined area, and how big of a kind of soundstage I really need to make, how big we're tight. Now, the thing about this that, might be a little bit of a misconception is that this is to get realism, and that's really not the case. This is just to wrap my brain around where people are, how far they are from one another, how much they can move. Also, as I'll show you in a second, what are some other things in the space that might kind of impact this? And visualizing it this way often brings up questions you wouldn't really think of. Yes, you can visualize this stuff in your head, but sometimes just having that extra drawing is like, well, where's the doors? You don't really think about these things. You think you do, but believe me, you don't. You can't cover everything just by, closing your eyes and imagining it. And cinematic sound design to me isn't really just about plugging some sounds into Dolby Atmos. It's about knowing where you're plugging them in and why, and knowing how to use the audio tools at your disposal to tell that story. So just to kind of further prove this, I'm just going to take this image and we're going to open Photoshop. And again, Unreal Engine is just the tool that I use because I'm not an artist, so drawing this out is really more time consuming to me than this is. So I could totally do this in Unreal Engine, but right now my priority is the audio, so I can only really do so much. If I were to draw this overhead and, whatever application I'm using or whatever napkin happens to be nearby at the time, I would kind of think about this, questions I would ask is, what is it made of? I'm going to say I might point at this and say walls are metal. And we'll just say 1/2-inch steel, or something like that, to kind of get the idea of, how much resonance and stuff there might be. And, I might think about what's in the space, what's along these walls. There'd be some cargo racks. Since this is, a cargo hauler, there'd probably be some handles, handrails, things for people to hang on to. There'd probably be some tools. For this guy back here, He would probably have some equipment. Forgive my handwriting. Some electronics. And this is the cockpit. I might kind of visualize where the engines would be. And we'll just kind of assume that maybe there's multiple spots. Because again, this thing does not exist. This is science fiction. I can dream up basically anything I want. I can make these move around independently if I really wanted to get that intricate with it, but I don't. There might be, you know, there's a hatch here. Maybe there's a hatch here. There's a door here. See, this is just, you can already kind of imagine if you had a character, and even if you weren't using Dolby Atmos or anything like that you can pan them and fade them in and out to make them feel like they're moving around a space like this. So once again, it's not about the tool. It is about just dreaming up the space. Now, that said, we are going to talk about a tool. We're going to talk about Dolby Atmos and how I broke up the scene and used Dolby Atmos to tell it. So, what I did is I broke up each of the zones of the dune sail. So we have the cockpit, interior, the cockpit from outside, the main area left and right, the top, the bottom, the back. I made copies of each of these groups except for the left and right, and made interior and exterior versions of these because the exterior ones I wanted to just apply an EQ, so these sounds are very muffled, so they are effectively on the outside of the vehicle. So we have front, top, bottom, and back. And then similarly, I have the cockpit on the inside, the top on the inside, the left on the inside, the right on the inside, and the back on the inside. And then I have engines. So these are the engine sounds and other kind of related sounds that are going to the different areas. So this one's going into the interior cockpit. So this is how the engine might sound from the cockpit point of view. It's going to the bottom and the front. So not quite one-to-one to the drawing that I did, but you get the idea. So if I kind of go through and listen to these, I'm just going to play a little bit of the scene. I'm going to mute the music so we can actually hear some of the stuff going on.
All right, wheels are going up. It's all air from here.
So let me open up the render so you can actually see what this looks like from that point of view.
Already?
Hey, we'll be fine.
Give us the upper ground size, sure.
We'll crest that dune up ahead.
One hover bite, just to our starboard side. No heat sig, definitely metal kind.
Well, shouldn't be a problem. I'm in position to take the shot.
Ready?
Yeah, let's fly.
Fly!
So you can see that this thing, I'm going to mute the audio so I can keep playing it. You can see that this is pretty reflective of this already. And it's not quite the same scale. There's only so much accuracy you can get with the space in this kind of theater view. So you kind of have to use your ears to fill in some of the gaps that this is creating. But you can see that there's things moving above, there's sounds that are coming out of the front, there are things coming out of the sides. And so if I kind of go back into this a little bit, let's see if there's a place I can put this. Okay, so if I go into the dune sail, so let's go into I'm gonna solo it. So now we're just hearing what's going on in here, and you can see there's a lot of ducking. There's ducking in the music, there's ducking in the actual audio tracks, and this is just a sidebar on compression and stuff like this. But to me, another level of immersion is not having things super smashed. So I only really apply, a master compression. But when I'm getting into these little details and things like that, I personally don't use a whole lot, aside from some controls to keep my levels from going out of control. But using automations is a great way to control the contrast within the scene, to control which details you're hearing where without, creating a very muddy mix, which compression can often do. So let's kind of go into the cockpit, and I'll just kind of show you what each of these zones sounds like, just because it's fun. So you can see some UI stuff kind of happening in the cockpit, right? Now let's go to the top. And then we have the left and right, so I'll turn those on together. So these are really just kind of adding texture by adding some rattles and stuff like that. So this is kind of just, you know, metal stresses and stuff like that, you know, because if you go back to this, you know, we can imagine we have cargo racks and some other kind of metallic details. We kind of have the back, which is where a lot of the impacts are. The big question you kind of have to ask yourself as you're going, and the question that I ask myself at least, is how much is, you know, how much is important to the story? And it can get a little easy to go overboard. As you start imagining this stuff, that doesn't mean you have to sound design it, and I think that's worth keeping in mind. Because once you put in the music and the performances and everything, you run the risk of overdoing it. It's definitely a creative choice. You can use any DAW to do this. It doesn't have to be Pro Tools, and it doesn't have to be with Dolby Atmos. You can use basic panning to do much of the same thing, and people can have a very similar experience. These just happen to be the tools that I'm using to do the job.